Hi, everybody. This is Dimitris Kαιρίδης, your host for tonight and for this Thessaloniki International Symposium. We have had two sessions so far. 2 weeks ago, on Monday, the 30th, on the COVID-19 pandemic and what it means for the world, with Kairidis from Oxford and Stephen Walt from Harvard. Then a week later, a week ago, December the 7th, we had an economic panel on the global recession and the Greek economy related with the COVID pandemic always, with Nicholas Vetas from the Athens Business University and Daniel Gross from CEPS, the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels. And today we have our third session of this four-session 9th International Symposium of Thessaloniki, which is dedicated to Turkey. Now, for us here in Greece, Turkey, of course, has been in the headlines the last few months. When we look at the world, very often our view is conditioned through Turkey and the Turkish threat and the Turkish problem and the Turkish neighbor. And so, given what has happened during the last few months, it could not be absent from our symposium this year. This is a topic that we have revisited in the past, live in Thessaloniki during the previous symposia. Let me, before I introduce our speakers for tonight, thank once more our co-organizers. Obviously, the prime responsibility for our meeting tonight goes to the Cultural Society of Entrepreneurs of Northern Greece, headed by President Stavros Andreadis in Thessaloniki. Then, of course, there is the Navarino Network, which I founded some 11 years ago. And although I'm no longer the director there, I'm still involved. And the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, our German friends here in Athens and in Cyprus that have been with us from the very start. In addition, we have the ACT of Anatolia College, the American College of Thessaloniki in Thessaloniki, the Affixes network, and our media sponsors, Kathimerini, the established Athens Daily, and TV 100 and FM 100, the local municipal media of Thessaloniki. All in all, we are very thankful to the city of Thessaloniki and Mayor Konstantinos Zervas for his support. Both Stavros Andreadis, Konstantinos Zervas, and the director of the Adenauer Stiftung, Henry Bonner, were with us in the opening of our symposium 2 weeks ago, and they had a chance to welcome everybody. And now, without any further delay, let me introduce you our first speaker. This time we will go consecutively. We will start with David Phillips, Director of the Peacebuilding and Rights Program at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University, New York. He has been in Thessaloniki in the past several times, and in our symposium, we are delighted to have him with us. He is very established in the United States and the world over. He has held many positions as a visiting scholar at various universities and think tanks, and he has written extensively and continues to write on matters of great importance, including our region, both in Southeastern Europe, in the Balkans, and in the Middle East, about Turkey, etc. He has been a very vocal voice on Turkey. I don't want to prejudge what he has to say. I will give him the floor now. David, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much for taking the time and making the effort. This has been a strange year. Thanks to technology, we can connect now with New York. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Dimitris, it's me who's delighted to be with you. I wish that I could be there in person. I have many friends in Thessaloniki and in Greece, having worked in the region over several decades. This is almost as good as being together in person. But thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be with you and to talk about U.S.-Turkey relations and what to expect from Turkey in the future. And as you know from me, I never mince my words. So I'm going to address your question directly by starting with an assertion that Turkey under Erdogan has gone rogue. It has become confrontational, aggressive, and lawless, defying U.S. expectations and undermining international order. U.S.-Turkey relations need to be based on rules and standards of conduct. Multilateralism and international cooperation are core principles for the incoming Biden administration. And I think we can see a heightened interest in working with European partners on issues like Turkey. Transatlantic cooperation will be the watchword for the Biden administration. Starting our conversation, I just want to maintain that nobody wants to lose Turkey. Washington needs to make clear what's needed to recover and to repair U.S.-Turkey relations. It also needs to make clear what are the red lines that will elicit a punitive response from the U.S. and the international community in the event that Turkey continues to provoke. Repairing relations starts with a steely-eyed assessment of the problems, and no longer can Turkey hide behind its NATO membership and expect special favor. In fact, if Turkey were to apply for NATO membership today, its application wouldn't even be considered. NATO is more than a security alliance, it's a coalition of countries with shared values. And because Turkey is anti-Western, Islamist, and anti-democratic, Turkey would be left out of the NATO family. European values mean something, and we need to recognize that Turkey has broken with those European values. Its provocative actions in the Eastern Mediterranean, Libya, Syria, and most recently in Nagorno-Karabakh and Artsakh are serious sources of concern. At a teleconference last week, the current U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, called Turkey's acquisition of S-400 missiles from Russia a gift to Moscow. So it's important to rein Turkey back in, to be clear with Turkey through a dialogue what we expect, and to try to work cooperatively so that Turkey no longer is breaking international norms and defying Western expectations. I'll pause there and see if you have questions.
That was 3 minutes, much less, but it's great. So I have plenty of questions. And let me start with the latest. Tonight, if I am correct, President-elect Biden is confirmed by the 500 plus electors. It took some time for the process to come to these conclusions. So Joe Biden will be sworn in as the next president of the United States on January 20th. You have worked with the Democrats in the past, from what I know, and you have worked for the Biden campaign. How much of a difference do you think Joe Biden will make in the US foreign policy, and especially, as you mentioned, to the transatlantic relations and Turkey?
So there will be a big difference under the Biden administration, especially when it comes to transatlantic cooperation. One of the centerpieces of Biden's foreign policy will be the need for the US and the EU to work together. The Defense Authorization Act requires the US to impose sanctions on Turkey for its acquisition of Russian missiles. The decision that was just taken by the Council of Europe to impose limited sanctions on Turkey because of its oil and gas exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean is a good step in the right direction. It might actually end up with stronger sanctions because the US and the EU need to work together, sending a unified message to Ankara about what normative behavior will be required. No more exemptions for Turkey. It's important that Turkey get back in the tent, and we find ways of working together with Turkey, but without exceptions or special favor.
Now, a lot was discussed and said about a special personal bond between President Erdogan and President Trump. I wonder if you agree that there was a lot of leniency on the part of the US president vis-a-vis Turkey's behavior, and if that's over.
Well, frankly, Trump and Erdogan both have authoritarian tendencies. They found some common ground, and that was to be expected. Trump turned a blind eye when Turkey invaded northern Syria and killed many of our allies fighting ISIS, the Syrian Kurds. We didn't implement sanctions under CAATSA, the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, although we certainly could. It's important, Dimitris, to recognize that no US president wants to pick a fight with Turkey. Trump was particularly compliant to Erdogan. And there's a lot of speculation as to why. The Trump organization has positions in 105 Turkish businesses. It received more than $10 million in royalty fees. Oligarchs from Azerbaijan gave money to the Trump organization. So there's some serious questions about the objectivity and credibility of US relations with Turkey under Trump. We're not going to see the same kinds of questions with Joe Biden as president. We're going to have a more principled and pragmatic foreign policy, which is based on certain standards. And those standards require cooperation and behavior, becoming a NATO ally and an aspiring EU member. If Turkey is not going to play by international rules, then it should expect to pay a price. No more amity has existed between Trump and Erdogan. It's time to get down to business.
Now, there is also, just to close this chapter, the Hulk Bank case that is coming up for adjudication in a New York court later in a few months' time, in the spring of 2021. Do you see any meat there, any real substance that things can come out in regards to Erdogan personally, let alone Turkey's role in breaking the Iranian embargo?
Yes, there's some real meat on the table. Several $1 billion worth of penalties could be required of Hulk Bank for violating US sanctions law towards Iran. We need to understand why the Trump administration gave Hulk Bank special privileges. There's a big debt that the Trump organization has coming due. Will Hulk Bank or oligarchs in Turkey be involved in helping to settle that debt? Anyhow, we've moved on. We have a new president. Hulk Bank will be held accountable for its support to Iran. It's important that they understand the rules and that the judiciary in the United States do what is required and attach real penalties to Hulk Bank for its breaking of US sanctions law towards Iran.
Let me now go a little bit back to history. Not long history, but the Erdogan trajectory. You will agree that in the beginning of his years in power, after 2002, he was hailed as a reformer, as a modernizer, as a guy who believed in the European vocation of Turkey. All this has changed more recently. What do you think happened? I guess you cannot yourself have failed to wonder, since you have been involved with Turkey in the past. You have visited Turkey several times. What went wrong?
A lot of wishful thinking by US officials. I don't think something went wrong recently. we just ignored the signs that were apparent. We wanted to believe that Erdogan was secular and democratic. All we had to do is pay attention to Erdogan's own words. He said that democracy is like a streetcar. You get off when you reach your destination. He gave a speech in 1999 where he said the minarets are our helmets and our swords, the faithful are soldiers. And he was put in jail for 6 months, convicted for 6 months for using religion to foment social division. So we should have listened to Erdogan's words instead of believing what we wanted to believe. It was apparent from the beginning that Erdogan was not pro-Western or secular. We just put our blinders on. Now we see Erdogan for what he is, an Islamist and an anti-democrat.
I cannot help ask you another question as a Greek here in Athens, a liberal Greek who is committed to the peaceful coexistence between our two nations, between Greece and Turkey, based on international law. We often come to despair, to a certain state of despair when we look at Turkish politics in general beyond Erdogan. I'm referring to his coalition partner in the far right of MHP, Devlet Bahçeli, but even the Kemalist opposition is competing with Erdogan in the nationalist rhetoric that has kind of polluted and contaminated the whole of Turkish political, at least mainstream Turkish political spectrum. And I wondered if the alternative to Erdogan, if there is an alternative, and if the alternative to Erdogan is any better. What is your take on that?
The only thing that Turks agree on is nationalism. Whether we're talking about the AKP or other nationalist parties, they agree on a nationalist posture. The only political party in Turkey which is not ultra-nationalist is the Kurdish party, the HDP. And its co-chairman, Selahattin Demirtas, has been in jail for the past several years. So there really is no viable alternative right now to Erdogan. That's why U.S. assistance should focus on civil society in Turkey, cultivating partners who will stand in opposition to the regime. We want the regime to change its behavior. And ultimately, if it doesn't change its behavior, we want Turks themselves to stand up and require a change of regime. But right now, when you look at the political party landscape in Turkey, there's not a lot of reason for optimism.
In the last 12 months, as you implied, Turkey was involved in 3 different fronts militarily, and quite successfully, both in Libya, in salvaging the Tripoli government, in Syria against the Kurds, our Western allies in Syria, the Kurds, and more recently, and even more daringly, I would say, in Nagorno-Karabakh against the Armenians. For us here in Greece, what happened in the Caucasus was particularly shocking, given the history, the very troubled and dark history of Armenian oppression and genocide by Turkey. And to see that military parade in Baku the other day with Aliyev on the one hand and Erdogan on the other was quite depressing.
It was sickening.
Yeah, you say it better, yeah.
So Erdogan has said that he would finish the job that his forefathers started. There was an Armenian genocide at the turn of the last century. The events in Nagorno-Karabakh represent a second Armenian genocide. The intention here is to purge Armenians from their ancestral lands. In order to do this, Aliyev couldn't act on his own. He used Turkish technology, especially armed drones, to attack Armenian positions. And several thousand jihadists from Syria were transported to the front lines in Nagorno-Karabakh, where they committed the same kinds of atrocities to towards Armenian Christians as they had committed against the Kurds in Rojava in northern Syria. So this is an unholy alliance of Turkey and Aliyev and jihadists working hand in hand. When Turkey's former deputy prime minister criticized women for smiling on the street, this is what you would expect from an ISIS leader, not from the leader of a Western country. So we need to be steely-eyed and see Turkey for what it is. We also need to be realistic about evaluating crimes that Turkey has committed. And just as a matter of transparency and truth-telling, Columbia University has launched a special website called the Artsakh Atrocities, where we've been documenting in great detail crimes against humanity and genocide that's been committed against Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's important that that information is documented. And ultimately, we hope that that information can be used in a war crimes proceeding where Aliyev and Erdogan can be brought to justice for the crimes that they're committing today.
Let me now turn to the region a little bit further south in the Middle East and ask you what is the relationship now, if you can sketch it out, with the Arab neighbors and Israel. We have seen a lot of confrontation with some Gulf states like the United Arab Emirates and Turkey and Erdogan personally. What is the architecture that is being formed in the Middle East right now with Turkey?
The U.S. tried to broker arrangements between some Arab states and Israel to establish diplomatic relations and to normalize their relations. This included the UAE and Bahrain and most recently Sudan. But this was all a campaign stunt by the Trump administration. It completely neglected the core issues of Middle East peace. How do you create a state of Palestine living in peace side by side with the state of Israel with economic prosperity for both? Now, those goals were completely omitted by Jared Kushner and the Trump administration, which in fact worsened the likelihood of conflict escalation. Now, these recognitions by Gulf states and Arab states do represent a positive step, but they need to be taken in concert with diplomatic measures to bring Palestinians and Israel together in real negotiations that would not only focus on a modus vivendi, but mutual recognition and sustainable peace.
And what do you think of the relationship between Israel and Turkey and the Arabs and the Turks right now? Where do they stand?
So these relations are entirely transactional. They're not based on principle. The Trump administration fed this transactional approach. There's nothing wrong with a transaction in international relations, but those deals need to be based on certain core principles, and those principles have been neglected. So we've seen some progress. There's much more room for improvement. The U.S. needs to be an honest broker, and it can become an honest broker if it is concerned about the rights of the Palestinian people, and it works with other states that are directly affected in order to achieve an outcome that allows Palestine and Israel to live side by side in peace and prosperity.
Now, you have worked a lot on the Kairidis issue that includes and refers to several countries in the area, not only Turkey, obviously, Syria, Iraq, even Iran as well. One of the issues that has been very much underreported here in Europe, strangely so, is the weakening, I don't want to use the phrase decimation, but certainly the pressure on the Christian populations in the Middle East. I mean, one would expect some fuss about it, but it has been happening in Iraq, in Syria, now in the Caucasus, as you mentioned just before. There was a lot of talk about atrocities against the Muslim Bosniaks back in the 90s. There hasn't been a similar kind of discourse in the West about our Christian co-religionists in the Middle East who are under enormous pressure, including Egypt, by the way.
Very true. The Trump administration professed to be friends of evangelicals, but it sided with Turkey in attacks against Chaldeans and Assyrians in Syria and also in Iraq. We need a coherent policy that looks at the interests of Christians in Iraq and Syria and takes specific steps, both in policy terms and programmatically, to protect and promote their interests. We've had a series of conferences on Christians in Iraq and have been outspoken, calling attention to their plight. And I can make available to you and your audience some of the documents that we produce that provide a roadmap for achieving those goals.
You were kind enough to send us your written statements, which we will circulate and post, of course, for everybody to see. Thank you very much for that. One final question before we say goodbye to you, David. Not everything was right before Trump, and not Trump is for everything to blame, I'm sure. There is a feeling in Europe that no matter what, the United States will be looking further to the Pacific and to Asia and to the East because of the competition with China and all the other structural changes in the world system, and that the Mediterranean and the Middle East will kind of fade, no matter what, into lesser importance. I wonder, what is your take? How much of a restoration Biden will be? How much of a new beginning, and what kind of this beginning will be for U.S. foreign policy now with him in charge?
So U.S. foreign policy in the Persian Gulf has been largely built around oil and energy access. Now, in these COVID conditions, the economy is depressed, the price of oil has been driven down, the U.S. continues to be increasingly self-reliant in developing its own energy resources. So I don't think that oil and gas will be the primary determinant. Nor will stability be the sole determinant, as it has been in previous administrations. It's time for a fresh start. It's time for the U.S. to think about core principles that it represents and how it can uphold the principles of democracy, human rights, and women's rights around the world, including in Arab countries. If the U.S. gets back to playing that role, we can resume our leadership in the world. If we're going to be transactional and side with countries with whom we do not share values, then America's influence will be limited. It's time for a wake-up call. I think the election of Joe Biden represents that wake-up call. We can turn the page and do much better. We'll see a whole new team and a whole new approach after January 20th.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope we can welcome you live in Greece next time, as soon as the pandemic moves away. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of chances to interact in a much more direct way. It was wonderful. Thank you. Take care, and happy holidays.
Thanks very much. I look forward to being with you together so we can continue this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you.
All right.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue the flow of our session, which is, as I said before, the third session of our international symposium, the 9th international symposium. We started back in 2012 at the centenary of Thessaloniki's liberation into Greece. We have two sessions on COVID, the political side and the economic. And tonight we are dedicating our meeting to Turkey, which has been in the news, especially here in Greece, but not only, in Europe and elsewhere very recently. We have heard just now, we just heard from David Phillips from New York, and I'm now going to turn to an old acquaintance who has been to Thessaloniki himself as well several times. Soli Özel, he's a professor of international relations at Kadir Has University in Istanbul, Turkey, in Constantinople, and a columnist at Haber Türk daily newspaper in Turkey. He has quite an illustrious bio. You can find all the information, including the biographical information of our speakers, on our website, which is the www.thessalonikiSymposium.org. And I think he's a very gifted speaker, and that's why we have him with us tonight. Soli, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. I wish I were in Thessaloniki, but we'll have to do what's available.
Part of our growing differences, the two sides of the Aegean, is now the time difference, which we didn't have in the past. But now you are an hour ahead for some reason, 3 hours ahead of London.
No, we didn't. It's been now 3 years that Turkey doesn't change to winter time. That's why the 2 hour difference. Then when we reach summer
brings us always
back to 1 hour. Yes.
Summer always brings us closer, I guess. But anyway, it has been a long winter in the relationship. There is no doubt about it. We're going to talk about it. But let me first start gradually before we go into the hot subject. Okay. How was Biden's election being greeted in Turkey?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that, especially for the Turkish government, the preferred candidate was Trump. But they also adjusted themselves even before the elections to the fact that Biden might be elected. There are reports that they've been trying to build bridges to the new Biden administration. And just 2 or 3 days ago, President Erdogan, said that he knew Biden, that he worked with a Democratic administration before that of Barack Obama. And he reminded everyone that Barack Obama in 2012 or 2011, I think, called him one of the 5 most, one of the 5 leaders he talked about most when he needed some advice. And he also reminded everyone that when he was convalescing from his operation back in 2012, Biden visited him in his house. So the first official opening is, okay, we worked with Democrats and Republicans. I know Biden, and I'll be happy to work with him.
Yeah.
This time around as well.
I went straight to the question, although the format is to give our guest speaker 5 minutes for some initial remarks. I don't know if you want to take it to make a...
No, just go ahead.
Or we can go on the questions like that, straight into...
Sure.
Well, so let me shoot it. We just heard from our previous speaker, Turkey has gone rogue. This is a feeling that is shared by many here in Greece and by others in Europe and elsewhere. If you can give us now you will need 5 minutes to give us, what do you think is going on with Turkey's foreign policy? How are we to decipher it?
I must say, I don't like the style in the conduct of foreign policy, but I find some of the criticism of Turkish foreign policy either too sentimental or unscientific. What has been happening is Turkey is, again, for better or worse, Turkey is taking advantage of a big void left in its vicinity by the retreat of the United States from the Middle East, by the inefficacy of European Union foreign policy, by the perception of threat that it sees emanating from the south of its border, whether it is in Syria or in Iraq, and is responding to those threats increasingly with harder and harder power. Whereas for about a decade, the motto was zero problems with neighbors, and therefore a premium on soft power. Changing conditions and the response to those changing conditions led Turkey to pursue more and more a hardline and military-oriented policy. So that's, in my judgment, objectively or structurally, what undergirds Turkey's behavior. Then, for those who criticize what Turkey does, by the way, when you say rogue, does that also include the fact that Turkey has close relations with Russia? Well, others did have close relations with Russia. Greece was actually pretty close to Russia during the Balkan debacle. We were on the two sides of things. There were Greek politicians who collaborated with the Serbs, who, according to the Turks and much of the world, were the culprits at the time. So I specifically, in my view, one has to analyze what the Turkish foreign policy's objectives are. Some of those are going to, part of what Turkey is going to be getting out of the interventions to the south of the border, both in Iraq and in Syria. It now controls a fairly large chunk of Syrian territory to the north. And that way, it claims that it is taking care of a major security threat that it faces. And indeed, that is part of the problem that it has with the United States as well, which, by the way, unless you announced it earlier, CAATSA sanctions have just been imposed on Turkish Defense Industry Directorate and some of its personnel. Now, I suppose when someone asks about the direction of Turkish foreign policy, they also mean, what is the position of Turkey in the Western alliance? What is the nature of Turkey's relations with the United States? And what's the nature of Turkey's relations with the European Union? No doubt, relations with the European Union suck, and the relations with the United States are also in deep trouble. There are too many problems that have been accumulating and that have been simmering. And Turkey got away with a lot of things that the United States does not, like by establishing a direct link between President Erdogan and President Trump. And as a guest of mine a week ago said in a conversation we had on a webinar, Trump basically encouraged Erdogan so that he could do what his generals were not letting him do, which was get out of Syria. The cover that Trump provided to President Erdogan is no longer going to be there under the Biden administration. And how the relations are going to proceed remains to be seen. As to the European Union, and in that context, of course, relations with Greece, just note that the recent documents of the European Union don't mention that Turkey is an accession country. I find European Union to be strategically rather inept. And however hard it may be to actually deal with Turkey and the way it conducts its foreign policy and the way it articulates its views, it's very rough. I also think that the European Union, qua union, is unable to come up with a strategic approach a strategic policy vis-a-vis Turkey. I think it was kind of embarrassing that last Thursday, the Union couldn't actually agree on a policy and is now going to be waiting for the Biden administration to declare its policy towards Turkey so that the European Union will be able to take a position. It's very difficult to take, I mean, by the way, I mean, this is not to make a judgment. Obviously, Germany, Spain, and Italy wanted to keep things calm. Greece, Cyprus, France wanted to push Turkey. I understand Bulgaria was on Turkey's side. But then members obviously get on each other's way, and the EU itself cannot come up with a policy that is consistent, coherent vis-a-vis Turkey. And that is part of the problem.
I'm sorry, I will interrupt so that we can
have
dialogue.
That's fine.
Yes. This is a criticism that has been raised here in Greece as well, obviously. But let me now turn a little bit. You mentioned the external environment and how this kind of induced Turkey's renewed activism, let alone militarily as well, in the near abroad. But let me turn now to the domestic sources of this change. I mean, one cannot be but surprised by the stark difference of Erdogan #1 and Erdogan #2, of the Erdogan of the early years, when many, many liberals in Europe, including here in Greece, greeted him as a modernizer, reformer, Europeanizer. And what has happened since the Gezi Park riots and obviously the failed coup of 2016. And I'm referring especially, and I want to comment on the MHP alliance with Devlet Bahçeli, and the extraordinary things that have been said. I mean, the rhetoric that has been used recently. So is there a domestic source of this external adventurism and jingoism?
Dimitri, you probably follow what happens in Turkey as closely as anyone else that I know. So I would put the move in the direction of more authoritarian rule, whereby the rule of law would be cast aside, not to 2013, not to 2016, but earlier, step by step. I would think that the 2010 amendments to the Constitution effectively, if not eliminated, certainly crippled judicial independence. You're right, in 2013, the reaction to Gezi Park, the way the power interpreted what Gezi Park was about, and particularly because Gezi Park was followed by the coup in Egypt, taking out Turkey's ally, the Mohammed Morsi, or the Muslim Brotherhood government, and the establishment of a military regime. And then in December, the Gülen organized allegations or revelations of corruption and all that, gave the impression that there was a sustained systematic attack, and a notch up went in the degree of control and repression. In my view, the critical turning point and the reason as to why Erdogan made or shifted from talking to the Kurds to aligning himself with MHP and its ideology is the elections of 7 June 2015.
The first election.
Excuse me?
The first election of that year when...
Yeah, June 7, 2015. And the importance of June 7, 2015 was that the Kurdish party became the third largest party in the country. And my sense is the entire Turkish political establishment was unhappy with that. And then a succession of events and the PKK's participation in rekindling the war generated the conditions after one massacre in Suruç and another massacre in Ankara, created the conditions for AKP to receive again 50% of the vote, okay? Then, and there, I don't know what your position is. I don't remember if we talked about it, but you underestimate the trauma of the coup for the Turkish public. And that's true. Erdogan took advantage of that and basically implemented an extraordinarily harsh system. The Gülenis were eliminated, but along with the Gülenis, a lot of people lost their jobs, their livelihood. It was a very harsh response. And that is, I don't know if there was such a demand in the public, but that's how things went. And today, he is beholden to his ally, MHP and Mr. Bahçeli. And we will see how things will go, but the promise of reforms that were kind of, that became compelling because of Turkey's economic conditions, which were going to be paired with judicial reform. I don't see the judicial reform in the way that I would understand it coming. And this nationalist agenda is going to be continued. And that's what you call Erdogan 2 was a product that has been in the making since 2010. It just accelerated, I would say, in the last 5 years. And among many other critical turning points, my turning point would be the elections of 7 June 2015.
Now, Soli, I won't be, first of all, I'm not going to be aggressive. I thank you very much for taking the time and being with us. I know this is a very highly charged environment that we live in. I believe in the dialogue. I believe in the need that we talk, and I find it commendable that you take the time and make the effort. I can be aggressive with AKP deputies, which I do in the Council of Europe.
You can be aggressive with me. It doesn't really matter. The way I would not so.
So the question that comes to mind next is there is a feeling in Europe and in Greece definitely that a lot of what is happening abroad is an effort of Erdogan to win legitimacy and popularity domestically. And this helps him out to move the attention away from the economic pressures and the other pressures that the regime is facing in Turkey. How true is that?
Look, first, apart from interventions in Syria where you could justify because you were fighting the PKK, your transgressions and your operations abroad don't get you much brownie points among the public. Libya does not resonate in the country. With all the brouhaha about Azerbaijan and stuff, you look at the polls, they don't bring much because we are past that point. That is, the economic conditions of a large segment of the population is so dire that all these foreign policy, quote unquote, victories do not translate into rising popularity domestically, certainly not for a long time, okay? Number one. Number two, and by the way, all the back and forth with Greece didn't really budge him up in the polls over the summer. Secondly, of course, there is a domestic side to it. Erdogan or AKP have been using foreign policy to build domestic political capital, probably at the very latest since 2009. with the famous incident in Davos when he confronted the late Israeli President Shimon Peres. So this is nothing new, all right? But to reduce Turkish foreign policy actions to that, in my judgment, is erroneous. It doesn't explain everything. And I also think we should differentiate, or we should make the distinction between two things. On the one hand, as I said, there are structural conditions which either prompt Turkey or enable Turkey to behave in a certain way. And the second side of it is that there is a rhetoric accompanying this, which actually makes the reaction to the policy a lot fiercer than perhaps it would have been otherwise. The nationalist discourse of blue homeland, the religious allusions in the speeches, you know, the opening of the return to Hagia Sophia as a mosque rather than as a museum, which I'm sure in Greece has shaken a lot of people and all that. All of those give an image that obviously relate to the foreign policy, but the foreign policy itself ought to be, in my view, analyzed in its own right as well. And in that, look at the Azeri thing. In 1993, I think the war was over and the Minsk group was founded.
1994, yes.
94. We are now in 2020. It's been 26 years. What the hell did the Minsk group do? And I'm not even talking about Karabakh proper. About 20% of Azerbaijan's own territory was occupied. Who did what? France, the United States, Russia. The time would come for Azerbaijan to do something, and Azerbaijan did do something. And yes, the Turkish military had actually trained their military for the last 25 years, and they did act together. This is, you know, all this talk about frozen conflicts really numb me, because no conflict is really frozen. They just wait to be activated. You don't pay attention. There are signs that have been there were signs that have been coming in the last 2-3 years, by the way, that nobody paid attention to, and suddenly something happened.
But of course, we are here to point to the contradictions of Turkey's position on principle grounds between.
Okay, fine. What is the contradiction? It's been consistently expansionist.
Okay, fine. Yeah, between Nagorno and Cyprus, for example. But I don't want
in
to...
Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkey cooperated with Azerbaijan. It did not occupy Nagorno-Karabakh. They just, to the best of my knowledge, they just took back Azerbaijan's territory proper. Cyprus is a different matter and shoot now.
Well, in Azerbaijan, Turkey defended the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, which, of course, it violated in Cyprus. But I don't want to insist on that.
No, I will not accept this, man. Look, the Cyprus issue, I really am willing to have with you if you want an aggressive conversation. The Greek Cypriots, with the help of the Greek junta in 1974, staged a coup against President Makarios, okay? I'm not talking about legality. I'm talking about politics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a colossal mistake because it gave Turkey what Turkey has been preparing to do since 1964, okay? And they wanted after that, as I see history, and for your audience, I am someone who, when it was not fashionable, have been in favor of a solution in Cyprus, supported various second track, the conversations and dialogues, and I am a member of the Turkish Greek Forum. Then in 2004, the Greek Cypriots reneged on their word. They promised that they would accept what Annan wrote in that plan and vote for it. They reneged on that. The European Union, because Greece blackmailed them, had to accept the Cypriots in. And then for the last, 16 years, nothing really happened. In the last big meeting in Kars Montana, it was the Greek Cypriot party that left the room and that basically broke the conversation. And the Greek Cypriots still do not want to pay any price for the mistakes that they've made. And and by the way, this will then end with not a one Cyprus, but a totally separated Cyprus, formally or not.
Sorry, I was referring first, without wanting to go into the details, but I will, to the matter of principle, that on the one hand, we have a community of Armenians who wanted to live their separate lives in Azerbaijan. Against that, Turkey is, whereas we have a community of Turkish Cypriots in Cyprus whose autonomy and secession is supported by Turkey. In that regard, the two cases are related, and Turkey is taking opposite position in the Caucasus vis-a-vis Cyprus. But I don't want to insist on that matter.
No, Dimitri, this is a play on words. In Cyprus, whether you like it or not, whether anybody likes it or not, Turkey was within its right, certainly for the first operation, because it was a guarantor country. It has no such relation with the Nagorno-Karabakh.
But let's not now turn and twist the legality of the guarantee. Let me ask you something. We have seen recently massive demonstrations in northern, quote unquote, northern Cyprus, occupied Cyprus.
Well, it is northern Cyprus.
Yes. Geographically speaking, yes, for sure. In the northern part of Cyprus, in the Turkish-controlled Cyprus, we have seen massive demonstrations of Turkish Cypriots against Turkey. And we have heard the former president, Akinci, declaring that his life is under threat and that the election was stolen by the vote of settlers, basically, rather than the indigenous Turkish Cypriots. I wonder, with these images in mind, I don't know if they were transmitted in Turkey or if there was any fuss about it in Turkey. Who is, how much of a defender of Turkish Cypriots Turkey is?
What you say has, well, I really don't read or watch what they call the mainstream media anymore, because it's worthless. So it was on social media. I followed it from that. I followed the elections very closely. I regret the fact that Turkey has intervened very heavily and probably tipped the balance in favor of Mr. Tatar in the elections. The Turkish Cypriots have not protested Turkey's interventions for the first time. They've done it before. Mr. Akıncı was in the crosshair of the military before he was in the crosshair of Mr. Erdogan. So that is that has been part of the interaction between Turkey and Turkish Cypriots. And yes, I do not condone and I do not like the fact that Turkey did intervene in the elections in Cyprus, in Federal Republic of Northern Cyprus, but that happened. Yes, that has happened. And then, of course, there was the visit to Varosha and the opening of the beach of Varosha. And we'll see what will happen later on in terms of whether Varosha is going to be open to construction and how things are going to happen.
Now, tell me something about the domestic. I keep on returning there, maybe as a political scientist, maybe because all politics is local politics. And when European liberals, including myself, look at the Turkish political landscape these days, one tends to become quite pessimistic in the sense that you see a competition of nationalistic jingoism. I mean, the opposition is not, it appears, Kilindziroglu, he appears not less nationalistic. Kilindziroglu, the
Kılıçdaroğlu.
Whatever, yes. I guess you pronounce Turkish much better than I do, of course. Now, tell me, you have the MHP, you have the AKP, you have the CHP, with the exception of the Kairidis, you have the İyi party, the Good party, with the exception of the Kairidis. As far as the Turkish political mainstream is concerned, you see a kind of a competition towards the a nationalist extremism.
The atmosphere and the narrative is very nationalistic, yes.
So what does this mean for Turkey's trajectory from now on? If the alternative is not any better, I wonder what is the...
Well, my view is that this decade that is starting in about 2 weeks is going to be a decade where the broken system will be somewhat repaired. We will have new rules. We will have new ways of interacting. And I hope to God that starting with the United States, Turkey will be able to find a common language and a redefinition of what the common interests are with the Western allies. I tend to think, much as I am critical of what goes on in Turkey today, I tend to think also that it takes two to tango. The Europeans are incapable of doing certain things. I don't think the European Union. And whether you like me saying it or not, I don't think Greek Cypriots are going to give the light of day to either Turkish Cypriots, whose political equality they're not willing to accept. And they are, if I were them, maybe I would think they're doing the right thing. They would be bitter and resentful of Turkey, and they try to block anything that Turkey does. With Greece, I don't think the situation is the same. We have had a good decade, more than a decade, after 1997, effectively, but let's say 1999. And if it weren't for this energy thing, maybe things would have continued along that path. But it is incumbent, in my view, both on Turkey to actually change its rhetoric vis-a-vis the European Union, and it is incumbent on the European Union to actually have a sensible policy vis-a-vis Turkey. Unfortunately, the trust between the interlocutors has been fatally broken. And it would be and that is very difficult to repair. I mean, look at the shouting match between Macron and Erdogan. Erdogan shouts more, I agree with you. But I find some of Macron's reactions are quite frankly infantile, and our reactions are not diplomatic. And this is no way to go about protecting what I consider still to be common interests that are out there.
Does this have to do with Kemalism as well, that the French laïcité is an enemy that Erdogan wants to attack in the face of France?
Well, look, I think Turkey is still the term president of the Islamic Organization Conference, IOC. Therefore, when Erdogan speaks, even if Turkey wasn't the president of IOC, Erdogan would still speak as the leader of the Muslims in the world. So he takes exception to what Macron said. That is for domestic purposes, very clearly for domestic purposes, okay? And I also know that the French
and Macron has domestic purposes, obviously.
No, and I know also that Macron is very disturbed, and in fact, the entire French establishment is very upset that Turkey is very active with Muslim communities in France. They consider this to be an infringement on their domestic politics. Okay, it's a very sensitive issue.
In France,
I don't think Turkey is being careful about that. And that really, really hits a raw nerve in Macron, in the French, and in the French political establishment, particularly because they have had waves of Islamist terrorism and stuff. And they also took a strong exception to the fact that Turkey, when the teacher, and I think the teacher's decapitation was not reported in the mainstream press here.
Samuel Paty.
Huh?
Samuel
exactly,
Paty.
exactly. And that Turkey did not send any message of condolences. That really rubbed them the wrong way as well. And so the tensions are constantly high. We'll see. Turkey has just announced a new ambassador for Paris. He apparently, I don't know him personally. Apparently, he is a
French speaking
classmate of
Macron. Yeah,
it's a good subjective situation. Whether it will help ameliorate diplomatic relations, I don't know. We'll see.
So you think sincerely that Turkey is still interested in being part of the West? Because this is in doubt in many corners in Europe, that Turkey the ship has sailed, the ship has left the port and is going...
Both ships, Dimitri.
Both ships, but now I'm interested in the Turkish ship.
Honestly, I don't think Erdogan has his heart in this. Rightly or wrongly, he believes he's been betrayed. Moreover, he believes Turkey has a lot more and bigger fish to fry. Okay. On the other hand, and I am in that a bit, if not deterministic, a bit structuralist, the dream of China saving Turkey economically, I don't think is going to materialize anytime soon. And there are plenty of interests, both economic and security-wise, between Turkey and the European Union. So if for the future, in my view, it should be possible to find a new language and a new way of addressing one another. I just don't think it's going to be easy. Unfortunately, for me, it will necessitate once more the mediation of the United States. And I hope that the United States is interested in that again.
Is there a concern about Turkey being overextended? I mean that, okay.
I do.
Okay. Oh, well, Turkey has grown a lot, fine, but it is under severe pressures recently. And after all, the economy of Turkey is not bigger than the economy of the Netherlands. So we are talking about a really mid-sized, at most, country. I mean, with wars here and there, with military presence here and there, with all these confrontations, is there a sense in Ankara, not you, I know you, but in Ankara, in the press, in the public domain, in the public discourse, in the parliament, is there a concern that maybe we are overextended?
There must be some people who in Ankara think we're overextended, but there are also some people who believe that we are not extended enough. Not we, Turkey is not extended enough. If you ask the blue homeland people, that's not enough. No, we need more. As for the public, I don't know if how much one can trust the polls, whether or not people are answering them right. I really do not know. But when you look at the polls, I think people who are now having a much more difficult time in putting bread on the table are questioning, like the Iranians are questioning what the money is, why the money is going to Hezbollah or Syria, whether or not all of this is necessary. It's not articulated because we don't really have a public forum in which all these things can be articulated. But deep down somewhere, I think people must be questioning whether or not we can afford to be that way. That part of the cost maybe has not hit the public yet, but sooner or later, I would think it will.
One of the most interesting confrontations recently have been between Erdogan and Arab countries. I'm referring to the United Arab Emirates, Obviously, Egypt.
Such love affair.
There was a love before, you mean?
I don't know if there ever was a love affair, but now it's a passionate love affair, yes, between the United Arab Emirates and Turkey.
So what is happening with the Arabs and what is happening with Israel? The South and the Middle East?
What is happening is Erdogan wishes to be the leader of the Sunni Muslim world. And therefore he is...
Wait a minute. Is this genuine? Is this...
I think so, yes.
Yeah. It is something that we think of it
otherwise, why pay a rather steep cost of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, and the steep cost is you don't have relations with Egypt, right? Effectively, there is now a boycott of Turkish exports in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates, and that's already to the tune of about $2.5 to $3 billion worth of exports to those countries.
We haven't gone that far, Solly, here in Greece, you know. Here in Greece, we haven't made that step. It's the Arabs who boycott.
Yeah, well, you can't because we have a customs union, just like you could not boycott
the
French goods.
Well, he declared it, but then he could.
By the way, you may not be aware of that, but plenty of people cross the border from Bulgaria and Greece to actually buy their groceries from Turkey because it's a lot cheaper. So you don't really want to break that. So there is, if you will, there is a contest between Iran and a group of Arab countries and Israel that are competing for domination in the Middle East. And there is another smaller, perhaps, fight between Turkey and Qatar on the one hand, and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan on the other. And Palestinians are divided, and Turkey is squarely behind Hamas. They wouldn't mind. Turkey still has good relations with PA, but their heart is with Hamas. Turkey is has favored most of the Muslim Brotherhood politicians in Egypt and elsewhere. That's why the Israelis are very upset about continuing support for Hamas on the part of Turkey. And Sisi is very upset that Turkey is supporting the Ikhwan, and a lot of them actually reside in Istanbul. And I think broadcast from
yes
as well. Yeah.
So we have to conclude. We have you
we just started.
I know. Many, that's the conclusion I make, are upset with Turkey. If you were, I will give you 2-3 minutes. If you were to say farewell to a mainly Greek audience, it's not just Greek, obviously it's international. We are transmitting through YouTube and Facebook and sites all over the world. But this is a Greek event organized originally in Thessaloniki. I would like to have you to have the opportunity to say 2-3 words to the Greeks.
Okay, first of all, I personally was very happy when relations between Turkey and Greece got a lot better. I was also delighted that in spite of the fact that some of the Gülen organization military personnel or the FETÖ personnel defected to Greece, and that was a serious crisis between the two countries. Your former prime minister and the Turkish president actually managed to work it out, okay? And that with a less populist politician as prime minister of Greece, we find ourselves in the very treacherous waters of the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, as we did in this in Eastern Mediterranean, I find very upsetting. I don't think it's the end of the story. Obviously there's a different point of view that may not be reconcilable. But I would take Erdogan's offer, however one may not like the way he presents it, that we should sit down and put all those issues on the table in an international conference, because this is a political matter and let's discuss it. Because otherwise, I'm afraid, we will not be able to get anywhere, and it will be a waste of resources, it will be a waste of opportunities, and it will cost all the parties involved tremendously if we continue escalating, if we continue a confrontational approach, and if we continue with the tensions. I mean, one last point about the energy sources, which, by the way, if they didn't come up, probably the Cyprus issue and Eastern Mediterranean issue would not have erupted. The amount of gas is not significant. By the time that gas can make it to Europe, and I doubt that it will be able to make it via the EastMed pipeline, maybe Europe is not going to be consuming as much gas either. So we may actually be fighting over a phantom. And instead of doing that, we could come up with ideas to see how we can actually turn Eastern Mediterranean a la Brodel into a common economic zone of cooperation. Yes, Turkey is too big and therefore it's too assertive. Sometimes it's very aggressive. On the other hand, it may not seem that way on that side, but the forum, the lines, the manifestos and stuff are also not non-aggressive behavior either. And unfortunately, I would have expected their friends to be a calmer. Instead, they are instigator. And I really do hope that with the Biden administration, we will be able to actually talk one another. It is my sincere belief. Otherwise, it's going to be too costly for all the parties concerned.
So, Liozel, thank you very much for your contribution and for your remarks, which we have listened carefully. I'm afraid that increasingly in this part of the world, in Greece, but not only in Greece, there is a growing realization that the confrontation, the rivalry, the tension, the crisis is not a result of misunderstanding that can be resolved through dialogue and sitting around the table, but the result of a turn for the worse. Let me stay on that in regards.
But allow me one thing.
I will allow you two things.
Did I use the word misunderstanding?
No,
I don't. But I don't believe it's an issue of misunderstanding. Both sides probably understand one another. It is on that understanding that they should sit down and start talking.
Mm. But
as to Turkey's orientation with the level of nationalism and all that, I don't know. It's much more difficult to say this with much certainty, as it used to be a lot easier, obviously. But I think the alliance with Europe and the United States has still some breath left in it. And honestly, if NATO is going to be anything to write home about, Turkey will have to be a member. And Turkey will also have to learn to be a good member that can cooperate with the other members.
I think that's, yeah.
To do the same thing.
No, I have to say farewell with a certain grain of, how should I put it, frustration. This is a country, and me personally, but not only me, many Greeks who invested in were heavily invested in the European vocation of Turkey. This is a country that really believed in it sincerely after 1999. I'm sure you agree with that. After Helsinki, and was supportive of Turkey inside Europe much more than the Germans or anybody else who shows to be lenient today and to have Erdogan's approval. What I'm trying to say is that this is a colossal frustration for those who have wanted this bettering of relations and wanted to see a democratic, prosperous, peaceful, happily existing Turkey. And we don't see that, unfortunately.
I'll put the Turkish political...
I'm trying to have the last word, but I'm sure I will fail. You have the last word, so...
No. You can say goodbye. I assure you, and since we've known one another, you will understand what I'm saying, even if your audience may not, that the frustration that you mentioned on your side, which I understand and concur with, I think you should also try to understand the frustration on the part of a good segment of Turkish society. I'm not talking about the political establishment. And also probably part of the bureaucracy in the way the European Union dropped the ball almost as soon as negotiations have started. But that's another topic. I don't want to say the last word and then run. But there is as much frustration, if not more, and disappointment and disillusion on this side of the Aegean as there may be on your side of the Aegean. And I think it is incumbent upon us to try to find ways of rebuilding those bridges.
We have a lot of work to do for sure. No matter what happens, we will be, let's agree on that, we will be neighbors. And we will have to find a way, one way or another, to coexist and to coexist in a way that is fruitful and productive for our two respective people. Let me thank you. This concludes our third session. Thank you very much, Soli.
You're most welcome.
I don't know, happy holiday season. I mean, it's a global
well, it's
affair.
Hanukkah, and then Christmas will come.
The Christmas and the New Year and the 2021.
And of course, in New Year, we will be confined home, I guess.
Yes, here in Greece as well. Hopefully, we will overcome this.
Well, let us wish 2020 will not be repeated.
Yes. Take good care. Thank you very much.
Sure. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for having me.